Hey, happy Monday, everyone. We are live, and today we're talking about culture is key. We apologize for the slight delay. We had some technical difficulties. As you know, when you want to use tech and it works, it's phenomenal. But when it does not work, it can be one of the most frustrating things ever. But we are here. So let's get into this conversation about why culture is key. Before we do that, Janet, I would love to give you some space to go ahead and share who you are.
Oh, hey, thanks, Javon. It's really great to be here with you. I
My
am
pleasure.
an executive coach and leadership development trainer and facilitator. And that's only part of what I do in my life, but I won't go into the rest because it's too complicated. I have a website and a business called Culture is Key, where I focus on just those things. Leadership development with a niche in intercultural competence, which is more complicated than you might think, because other cultures or people who come from different backgrounds have different ways of communicating and different ideas about power relationships and all kinds of stuff. So, since I've lived in different countries, in different places, and I've learned a couple languages in my life, I'm kind of attuned to this and I enjoy it. I think it's really interesting. So, that's part of what I do. I have clients in the States and outside the States. One of my main clients is Boeing. I used to work there. And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And you hit on the component of intercultural communication. And that's going to be an aspect of what we talk about a little bit, because with intercultural communication, there's this concept of being non judgmental and open. So, do you
Yeah,
want to talk to us a little bit about how that can be applied within the workplace?
sure. So, most teams, especially in tech, or many teams, I would say, these days are global, which means that, they're not only virtual, but you're dealing with any number of people from different places on every call. And those people might be in different time zones. They might have, very, very different first languages. So, one thing that I advise leaders to do is to really intentionally focus on that with folks and be curious and ask everybody to tell about who they are and where they come from, and to intentionally bring some exercises and encourage some conversations about how they like to work, how they view time, what are some interesting things about where they come from, what are the expectations in their workplace, how does the decision making happen, all this kind of stuff that's really, really important to everyday life in the workplace. But that if you come from the States, where the States are so big, a lot of us don't have the opportunity to travel around and be in different places. So we have a certain view of the world that can be sometimes a little bit lacking. And we make some assumptions. This is common, right? We all make assumptions about how other people are, about whether they're understanding us, about how they prefer to communicate, even whether or not they're able in their culture to say, I don't understand. Can you repeat? Or right, to admit that they're not understanding what you're saying, or even to say no. And so team leaders really have to step up and say, hey, we got a diverse team. Let's all talk about who we are and how we are. And to do that, that team leader really has to know how to establish psychological safety. And the best way to do that, or one of the ways, the elements you mentioned just now, and that is non-judgment, no judgment. You cannot come to a meeting and say, oh, you come from this country, you must be X. No, ask questions, don't make statements.
I love it.
What do you think, Javon?
No, that's awesome. And it when I was listening to you, I know we spoke about communication differences, based on backgrounds, based on a lot of different things. But
Yeah.
also there's some things we cannot readily hear or see, which are experiences that allow us to communicate differently, our behavioral patterns. Some people call it personality types, right? So as leaders, we really have to be conscious of these things and be willing to ask clarifying questions and understand that we do not know everything, right? So when someone's getting frustrated or someone's not doing a task the way we want them to do, let's make sure, let's take extreme ownership and ask, how can we best communicate? How can we best support our people to ensure that their success is theirs, obtained, and find out what success even means for them. Oftentimes, we come into these spaces and we have no idea. We don't know anything about our people on a personal level. We have to get personal. I'm sorry to tell y'all, you have to know at least a little bit about the people you are working with. If you do not, you will find that things, the results that you crave so much, your bottom line and your performance metrics and all that stuff, they will be impacted by this. So I am glad we're having this conversation because, I was just talking to someone that said, "Oh, I'm so glad you post and talk about emotional intelligence." I had a leader tell me that they cannot be empathetic because they don't have time. And I think there's a miseducation or misunderstanding on what empathy means, and that's really an underlying component of what we're talking about here, Janet, is being empathetic.
Hey, Javon, yeah, I totally agree with you. You cut out. I didn't hear what you said about what that guy said, but yeah, I mean, empathy is completely key. So I have a little story about empathy from that I can a workplace. So my team at Boeing is very, very multicultural. They cover probably 8 countries and lots of different languages. And we all know each other fairly well, but we get very few possibilities to meet in person. So every year we have an offsite. And the last offsite we had, I felt the heaviness, because Boeing is struggling. It's been in the news, and it's heavy. It's a little bit sad. And they asked me to do the opener for the offsite. And so I had this idea to help us show our empathy to each other and to the company by expressing our emotions. So people came in and we established, okay, this is safe space. Everybody agreed. That was the first step. Second step was I said, look, we're having a hard time, right? This is a hard time. It's tough. We're carrying a lot of emotions. I feel it. Everybody feels it, but we haven't addressed this very intentionally. So let's name our emotions now. So I said, I'm going to model this. I said, I'm feeling sad. And I asked the audience to come with their own emotions. And I had limited expectations because, our team is there are a lot of people who are super smart and fairly introverted. So I wasn't sure how much they were going to speak up. They came, boom, 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 angry, frustrated, all these emotions. I was blown away. They were ready for it. So I totally thanked them. And then I said, okay, now we know what we're feeling, including guilt. And there was the moment of silence, right? When that word guilt came. And then I said, okay, we're going to get it out now. We're going to let it out. So I put up it's not a curse. It's like, oh dang, the equivalent of oh dang in another language that I speak in Slovak from former Czechoslovakia. That's another story. I put it up on the slides, and it's a funny thing too. I explained to them. It says dokelu. That's what it sounds like, dokelu. And I told them the direct translation of this expression is into the cabbage, because the Eastern Europeans are totally into cabbage. And when they're upset, they say this. They say dokelu, which is essentially like, oh man. And I said, all right, I want you to say it with me. And I made them say it. And they were like, dokelu, dokelu. And I said, louder, dokelu, do. And they were like, getting louder. And then I said, okay, come with me. And I banged on the table. And they did it with me. And it was hilarious. And when we were done, they were laughing. And then I said, okay, it's your turn. We have so many different cultures and languages in this room. bring an expression from your culture, from your background. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, make it up. I want this to feel safe. And teach it to the folks in your row. They were sitting in rows, and the whole room exploded into talking and laughing, and they did it. And we learned how to say all kinds of stuff in Chinese, in Arabic, in Thai, in Malay. My favorite one was the Malay expression. I asked him, he said it, and I asked him, his name was Sheikh. I said, hey, what does that mean? And he said, go die. I said, you mean a person should go die? No, right? He goes, no, the situation should just die. It should go away. And it was such a release for everyone. I had never seen these folks do this kind of stuff. So sometimes it's just a matter of creating the opportunity for people to express themselves in a way that they wouldn't normally do during a workplace meeting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that story, Janet. I mean, here it is. I just think of the ability to bring the whole you into the workplace.
Yes.
And this is probably the first time ever that everyone in that room felt like they could bring the whole them. Because
Yeah.
oftentimes they don't use their language, they don't bring any aspect of their own culture because they're assimilating to the workplace culture. It's like this concept of being mindful of that as leaders can really change the morale and the feel of everything that's happening, no matter how bad it seems, how dire the circumstances. You allow people to do that, you'll be surprised what innovation, what motivation, and what just comes up from cultivating that space of psychological safety and allowing people to be their whole selves. So thank you for so much for showing the impact of that, because I'm sure when they left that room, they probably felt so energized. They're like, okay, how do I make this situation go die? As he said, how do I make sure that, as we move forward as Boeing, in this case, and this is applies to any organization, how do we
Yeah.
ensure that the next steps that we take are the best decisions to make to get our reputation back in line, to improve the circumstances within our organization, to improve employee engagement and retention, to ensure that we do not have to release people that we really don't want to release, and lay off.
Yes.
All these
Yes.
different components are really impacted by this, and it's tied to the practice of being mindful as leaders to say, you know
Yeah.
what, let me come empty to this space. Let me become aware of my thoughts, my biases, and the actions that I'm taking. And let me
Yes.
allow space for everyone in this room to give me their insights, to give me their perspective from their whole selves.
Yes. Yes, Javon, well put. I would build on that, and I would say that for leaders to do that, to come empty, to come allowing everyone else in the room to bring their whole selves, those leaders have to be grounded. They have to be okay with themselves. They have to know themselves well enough to be able to step back without feeling compelled to act like the leader, because a lot of leaders feel pressure to come knowing everything, to come being the one to make everything happen. They feel a lot of responsibility when,
Mm,
in fact, if they can motivate their teams to feel, to feel involved and to feel included, their people are probably going to bring a lot of great ideas. The safer they feel, the more willing they're going to be to bring ideas, to speak up, to
yeah.
feel more motivated. And that lightens the leader's load. Then the leader can be more of a manager and less of a doer and a participant and a worrier, right? Sometimes. And they can delegate. They can delegate more readily. People will want to be delegated to because they will feel empowered to do
Right.
things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I feel like, as we think about this, is really leaders, from my experience, leaders feel that weight of having to know everything and have all the solutions because they're so tied to outcomes, right?
Yeah.
We allow the journey to come to shape by just, taking these actions that we're talking about, whatever the outcome you wanted, the outcome that takes place because of you did this is probably going to be much better because you're allowing your people to take ownership. That's really what
Yeah.
we're talking about here. Allow them to take ownership and allow them to feel value as a part of the greater whole. Because and especially in virtual teams, people just feel like they're separated from everything that's happening. They don't know how what they do goes into the greater piece of the organization's goals. They don't know how what they do ties into their personal goals anymore. So there's this really sense of lost, right, among what we're talking about in these cultures today. And to get that back, we really have to be intentional about communicating on the level that we're talking about, doing things differently, Janet, because I've heard
Yeah.
so many times that's just the way things have been. Clearly, that is not working anymore because that's not the way things are today.
Yeah. We really, really are forced to be more and more agile, every day these days. And um, I can't, I can't agree with you enough. I mean, if leaders can allow themselves to, it's like you said, it's almost like sharing more. It's like
Mhm.
being willing to be a little bit more of a participant on the team, just long enough to help everyone else feel safe. And that involving of everyone else in a safe way, really, that goes a long, long way to solving all the employee engagement problems. And as you point out, especially if you're virtual, you can't help but feel a little bit disconnected. I mean, people
Mhm.
get used to
Mhm.
Zoom, everyone's used to being online, but it's not the same and it's never the same. And I'm actually convinced that's one of the reasons also why that meeting that I helped facilitate was so successful, because we were all physically in a room and it was
Yeah,
miraculous. Like some of
yeah,
those folks I had never met in person before.
yeah. And,
There
and
was
when you
one.
think about that, yeah, they probably never met each other in person before, right?
Yeah,
So
right. And you know how it is. You know how it is. Like you talk to someone at a meeting every week or every other day or whatever online, and you get so, and you have this idea of how they are physically,
yes.
right? You have this idea, oh, this guy's tall. For sure he's tall. I can tell, or she's this or she's that, whatever, just or she moves fast or whatever, right? And then you meet someone in person and you just go, oh my God, this person is so different from what, like we build this fantasy land because our brains want it. Our brains are seeking, right, all that information about somebody, but we really only ever get to see them from the waist up.
That
And
is
the
so
whole
true.
body does a
If we see
lot
them
of
at all,
that.
because some people have their cameras off, right? If
Yeah,
we
if we
see them
see
at
them
all.
at all, right. And there are companies that allow, right? There are plenty of companies that allow people to have meetings without their cameras on
Mhm.
ever, which I personally don't think that that's a great idea. I mean, I've spent plenty of my life speaking to black screens, and you know, it's not great. For one, you get used to making faces, and then suddenly when you have to face somebody on camera, you're like, "Oh, I have to be polite now."
It makes you a little bit more robotic because you're not used to it anymore. So
Yeah, it makes yeah, it kicks in the facilitator kicks in like, "Oh, okay, yes, we can see each other's faces now." So,
I love it.
I will not be, whatever I'm doing. I tend to have an active face, so I have to be careful. So, yeah, all these things are connected. I mean, you've done a really good job of kind of encapsulating it, right? We need psychological safety as a foundation for a leader to be able to then introduce some more intentional work, right?
Let's explain
To bring
psychological
everyone in.
safety a bit,
Yeah.
Janet, if
What
you
is
don't mind,
psychological safety?
because it's like we hear that term a lot.
Yeah.
But what does it look like? If you please share, what does it look like
Yeah.
to actually create a psychologically safe environment?
Yeah. Well, I usually like to ask people what they think the definition is. So then we generate definitions.
Mhm.
My favorite definition is basically being in a space with other humans, whether it's online or in person, where everyone feels that they can be themselves without being judged or criticized or ignored or belittled by others. And whether that means feeling free to speak up or not depends on culture, because there are plenty of cultures who prefer not to speak up, and that is completely fine and acceptable. The US Americans tend to expect people to speak up as a sign of their engagement, but that's not true in many Asian cultures. So it's creating a container where people are not worried, where if they have something that they would like to say, if they want to bring up an issue, if they want to bring a new idea that they're excited about, they will do it, and they will not be afraid of retribution, criticism, being ignored, being laughed about in the hallway, whatever, right? This is the basic kind of definition. And what it looks like is team communication where other people listen. We're not talking about email now, but meetings where other people listen to each other, where there isn't a ton of competition or sarcasm or interrupting, and where people's contributions are acknowledged. And it's especially important for the leader to do this because the leader sets the tone.
Mhm.
It also means that the leader needs to understand how to talk to someone who may not be behaving in a safe way, right? Somebody who's violating the psychological safety, that can be a problem, and a leader has to have the skill to either stop it in the moment or ask that person during the break to have a chat and explain to them, hey, please, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I think is happening. So let's try something different,
Mhm.
right? So, and that's a real skill. So all of this is kind of the psych safety package.
Absolutely. And there's this, really succinctly, it's like allowing people to be vulnerable,
Yeah,
to be able
totally.
to share their thoughts without, being patronized or judged or belittled, like you said. And that's really hard because it also means that there's so many different, behavioral patterns and types, right? So, some people just have this knee-jerk reaction to want to say something. So
Yeah.
oftentimes, you really have to be mindful. Be
Yeah.
mindful. And if you want to say something, you might have to filter it a little bit so you're not coming out outwardly and saying, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? Because you may just want to understand a little more, right? So ask a question like, tell me more about, how you got to this conclusion, or having, I always talk about coaching conversations, being willing
Yeah.
to ask clarifying questions before you come to your conclusions, and you listening to understand versus that response. Now we have over
Absolutely.
100 people on this right now looking at us live. So type into the chat some of your ideas about why culture is key and what a great culture means to you when it comes to the workplace. We'd love to hear it as we continue this discussion. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's this other component, and we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, and it's overcoming the historical nature of unhealthy cultural components. So you want to dive a little bit into that, Janet?
Yeah. That's a big topic, Javon. Um, so there are lots of cultures, for example, where, and now I'm speaking through my cultural lens, my personal, sort of quasi US but global lens. There are a lot of cultures where interrupting and having folks talking at the same time is totally acceptable, right? And that can be pretty challenging for others from other cultures, right? So, where I am right now in Slovakia, Eastern European culture, people talk at the same time a lot, and I watch them, and they go blah 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 blah, and then they're like, "Okay, we agreed," and they walk away, and I go, "What? What did
How
we
did you
agree
hear
on?"
anything that was just said?
I didn't get, yeah, but they do, and because they're used to talking like that, and they anticipate and they hear bits and pieces and they know. And part of that is about being in a high context communication culture. This is a formal parameter of intercultural communication. A lot of cultures are high context. So what does that mean? It means that there is a lot of understanding that's grounded in the culture of what things mean and how people think. And the result is that people don't give each other what we would consider full information. They give more like hints, right? It's like, imagine that you have a boss who says to you, take care of it. And you, right, we as Americans might be like, what do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
what are the parameters of that? Like, how far can I go? And how do you want me to take care of it? And when do you want to take care of it? But there are lots of cultures where, it's up to you, and you will run and you will do everything you can to solve that issue the
Mm-hmm.
way you see it. And then there are very low context cultures like our culture, for example. Or I was once in London with a friend of mine and we were laughing. She's from a high context culture. I'm from a low context culture. But in London, you had like the lowest I've ever seen. So when you're downtown and there's a low brick wall and it's very tempting to sit on it if the weather's nice, right? And there's a sign on the wall that says, don't sit on the wall because you could fall backwards and hurt yourself. we're like, we're like, okay, last time we looked, we were adults. So this is not a playground, right? So yeah, we get it. And just all kinds of stuff like that, all over the place, signs on doors, like signs everywhere. It was very interesting. So this is another sort of thing we need to take into account. And when you work, if you're a low context communication person from that kind of a culture and you work with folks from a high context culture, it's good. I like to say it up front. I like to say, there's this difference here. I don't necessarily understand what you need from me
Mm-hmm.
when the conversation goes like this. I know that your colleagues do, but I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, but I'm probably going to need more information from you. So I'll be asking you. So please have patience with me because I will be asking for clarification. And so I try to do that, to like call it out in a polite and safe way. And it's not a guarantee that it'll automatically work. But as you work with someone over the weeks and years, we tend as humans to meet in the middle, right? We tend to mirror each other, right? The neuroscience kicks in and we tend to mirror. So we do end up meeting in the middle. And it's a very interesting process. I've been through this with my Chinese and Indian colleagues, and it takes time. It takes time for us to figure out what it is we didn't know and what it is we know now.
That's part of the fun of communicating, though, right? It's like,
Yeah.
if you're open to it, and like you said, like removing as much ambiguity in how you want to communicate and how that other person wants to be communicated with is very important in ensuring that we have this wholesome culture. Because if we're communicating in two different levels and languages and with different contexts, it could be very, very frustrating. And when I think of this, I also think of DISC, the behavioral types. So if I'm a high D, I want things like, I don't need all the details. I need
Yeah.
to just know that the high level things, how we get this thing done and how we get it done effectively and efficiently. Whereas someone that's
Yeah.
conscientious or on that C side, they want all the details before they take one action. They want to know step by step by step by step by step. So that's what this reminds me of, Janet. Just like, how do we find out the best way to communicate and then take that into account, into consideration, because it's not just about us. And we have to understand that, especially as leaders in these environments, how we do things is not how everyone else does things, and how we understand things and communicate is not how everyone else was going to understand and communicate. So we have to ensure that we're giving them what they need to ensure that they feel that psychological safety and to ensure that they're able to perform at a high level without burning themselves out or feeling like they're going against everything they value
Yeah.
in life.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up the DISC stuff, the high D, that's part of the DISC assessment with the 4 types of leadership
Hmm.
styles for the audience. I know you know. Um, I'm so glad you brought that up because it can be extremely helpful to help people understand their own styles in an intentional way by bringing one of those assessments to a team and having everybody take it, right? And then having a session to debrief it. Like, what does this mean if I'm a high D? What does this mean
Right.
if I'm a blend of 2 of the other ones, right? The influencer or the
Steady.
conscientious, right?
Steady. Yep. Yep.
And what does it mean if I need to go and meet with someone who's sort of my opposite style? How can I communicate with them better? And what I
Mm.
find is that it's powerful if you have a large enough group and you're doing this, that you put all the people who are strong in the same category together, like in one corner of the room, and let them talk to each other. Give them some prompts like, okay, what happens when you perceive that you have a problem? What's your first reaction? And let them compare notes. And then they start smiling because they're like, oh, you're just like me. And then, right? And
Right.
then mix them up and like see the differences. And then, work through it, right? And the session or somewhere in the session really come to that discussion of, okay, you have problem X and you're a people person, an influencer type of yellow, and you need to go talk to the finance director, who is very conscientious, who's very much about details and numbers. What do you do? How do you start that conversation to catch that person's attention and keep it? How do you show them that you know what's important to them in your message? And they should be able to reciprocate if they go through DISC and they have some consciousness. And it's good also to bring it back up. Like if you do DISC, bring it up again, revisit it a month later,
Right. Absolutely.
right? I'm sure you do that.
Yeah, you
I'm
have
sure
to
you do
because
that.
sometimes there's a component of point in time, right? So if something happens in your life or something is going on within the organization, it may slightly change a little bit, and then there's also the adjusted level of where you are, where you fall in there. But we're gonna wrap it up. So I wanted to know, Jen, like, is there anything if someone's like, you know what, yes, I understand that culture is key, and I really want to, we're struggling a little bit within the workplace. What do I do? What's the one thing that I need to start with? What would you tell them?
Uh, as a so I'm assuming this is let's say it's a leader.
Yes, it's a leader.
Okay. Um, my advice is to get your folks together and ask them to write down what they think is working really well on the team and what they think isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then get together in pairs and talk about it. And then facilitate a session in the full group where people openly, right? This is assuming that this leader has been able to establish a safe environment. This is an opportunity for folks to bring things that have been bothering them, like under the surface, for a while, and that process of first reflecting on it for yourself and writing it down, then discussing it with one other person, and then coming back to the group with some facilitation, maybe making points on the whiteboard, maybe putting up anonymous post-its, whatever. This is what I would recommend as a first step. That bring it, right? Don't sit on it. Don't call your consultant who's going to come and interview you as the leader and no one else, right? Because that doesn't usually bring the results. But Get the skills and the confidence to face it together with your team. And this is something from old negotiation practice, and that is turn your team together and look at the issue rather than looking at each other like you're the problem. No, right? Shift the perspective.
I love it. I love it. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, Janet. So, how can everyone connect with you?
They can find me at janet@cultureiskey.coach. That's .coach. It's weird, but that's what it is because I'm also a coach. And my website is cultureiskey.coach. I am on LinkedIn as Janet Livingstone. I'm based in Seattle, so I believe there is more than one Janet Livingstone on LinkedIn, but I'm in Seattle. And yeah, that's how they can find me. I would love to be in touch with folks if they have questions, if they have, points of curiosity they want to bring, go for it.
Awesome, awesome. Well, you all, thank you so much for having it. We had over 100 people here today, so at various times. So really
That's
appreciate you
fantastic.
all's engagement, and we look forward to. You can still post your comments on the replay. All right, make sure you guys share this, to subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Make sure you follow me, or not even follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn, and then follow me on Instagram at Javon Speaks.